So now that we understand how we can work with images and translate it to text and text to image, I want to show you how we can do the same thing with speech. Now, it's going to be very similar to, in fact, the last lessons, but this time we're converting text to speech, and then in the next lesson, we'll cover speech to text. So let's take a look at this endpoint and see how similar it really is to the image endpoint that we just covered, or the vision model. So if we come to OpenAI's docs, you can see we have the quick start again, the introduction of text to speech, and here it gives you an example of the Alloy voice. So if you were to click play, it would play that voice. And in fact, it gives you a bunch of options here. So you have Alloy, Echo, Fable, Onyx, Nova, Shimmer, etc. And you can pick whichever one you want. Now, if we look at this curl command, notice that it has the model TTS1. That is one of the parameters we're going to be sending it, along with input and voice. So input is actually just going to be what we want it to say. So whatever the user types in for the input, that is exactly what that MP3 file is going to hold. Now, this gets generated the same way as an image as well, and the fact that it's going to be stored as a URL. So that is actually what we're going to be looking for on Bubble side when we're going to display and play the audio. We need that URL that it returns. So let's just copy the curl command and head over to Bubble. So we'll copy and paste. We'll come into our editor. You can see here we left off on the vision page. Now let's make a new page, and we'll call this text to speech, TTS, and just go ahead and create that. Once we have that, let's go over to our plugin. And as you know, we've been using the same headers here for our API connection, so we don't need to worry about that. Let's just go and import another curl. So we'll paste that in here. Just click import. Now you can see, again, it populates those headers, but we don't need those. We're already using the shared headers. Just go ahead and delete those. And then we just want to focus on our JSON body here. Now, it's very simple. We don't need to change anything regarding the structure or the parameters. We're just going to simply make these static variables dynamic. So right now, we'll just go ahead and delete today is a wonderful day to build something. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. Add in our dynamic variable. Let's just call it something like user_input. Close that off. And then for Alloy, we can just go ahead and leave the voice as is static, or you can let the user determine that. So in this case, I'd probably make a drop down if I were going to make it dynamic and have the user select the voices based on what OpenAI allows you to use. And that's how I'd go about doing that. For now, we're just going to leave it static and not worry about that. And another thing you want to change is, of course, the name. So we'll change curl call. Let's change it to text to speech. So text to speech. And of course, we want action. Now for this data type, we're actually going to be using file. So instead of JSON, let's go ahead and select file. And then let's initialize the call and see what happens. So you can see once it says preview here, that means the API call was successfully initiated and we're good to go, can start working on the workflow. But we, of course, need to design out a little page here so we can display it on Bubble. So we'll start with our group. Let's go ahead and drag a group on the page like so. And then we'll need two things. We need the inputs. Actually, we're just going to need one because we left that voice static. So we'll just drag one input over for now. And then you just need to come over and drag a button on. So right below the input, we'll have a button. And of course, I'm going to change the layout right now just to align to parent, so I can move stuff around where I need it. Actually, let's make that fixed. There we go. And then I can drag everything where I need it to be. So we'll just drag this button down, put the input right here. And we'll just change this to something like say it or speak. Let's call it speak. So the user will input what they want to be said or be voiced over in this input, and then they'll click speak. And then we need some way to actually play the audio. So how are we going to do that? You're probably thinking it's going to be something really complicated or confusing, but it's going to be as simple as installing a plugin. So let's go to our plugins, come up to add plugin, simply type in audio. Once you have that, you want to scroll down to our custom audio player right here. You can see there is a lot of apps using it. Let's go ahead and install the custom audio player, and we can close out of that. So once we have that installed, just come back to your design, and you can see we now have this custom audio player right here. That's what we're going to be dragging on the screen. So just come, drag that on. And for now, we're just going to leave it like that. So pretty simple. You have your input, your button, and then your audio player. So to make this work, we're gonna need that URL that's getting returned from our API call. But first, we need a way to actually get that response, and we need to store it in our database. So let's go back to our data and add a data type. But instead of making a new data type, let's actually just go ahead and make a new field in our user and call it audio. So we'll call a new field audio, and for the type, remember, it's gonna be a URL, so we need to select text. So you might think that we would need to select like MP3 or some other weird type or file, but no, we just need to select text and then go ahead and click create. Now we should have this audio record in our user data type that is of type text. Okay, now that we have that, we have our design set up. One thing you need to do is come over to your custom audio player, open that up, and then you see this dynamic link area right here. And this is actually what the URL is going to be used for. So for dynamic link, we can just go ahead and get the current user's audio, and it's going to be as simple as that. That is actually all you need in order to make this work. So we'll just have the current user's audio, which is that URL in that dynamic link. Then when a user inputs and submits, it will capture that URL. They'll be able to click play, and we're going to see this live in just a second. So let's just finish the workflow and see how this comes together. So we'll head over to workflow. And make sure you do it on the button just so we get that button. We'll add a new step. Now the first step here is actually going to be calling that API. Let's come down to our plugins and find that text-to-speech endpoint that we just made. And you can see that there's nothing displayed here. That is because we forgot to do something quite important. Let's come back to our API, and you can see that we have it selected as private, meaning we weren't able to use it in our workflow. So go ahead and make sure that's unchecked. And then we can go back to our workflow, and you'll be able to see the user type now displayed. So we can insert dynamic data, and we're gonna be looking for that input A's value. So whatever the user inputs. Now, if you chose the route in making the type of voice dynamic, you'd also have that option here, and you could have your drop-down values as well, but we're just gonna leave it as the input for now and continue on. So the next step is gonna be updating that database. So once we get the URL, we need to store it in the audio record of that user data type, and then we need to display it on our front end. So let's do that step right now. Let's add it to our database. So come to data, we will be making changes to a thing. And the thing we're gonna change is the current user, and then simply add all fields, and we can get rid of AI image, message, and vision. So we're just left with audio, and the audio is gonna be the result of step one, and then you're looking for the URL, and it's just that easy. So we have audio equals result of step one, URL, and that is what we're gonna display in that audio player. But before we get there, this actually works similar to the images, meaning we had to manually add that HTTPS for it to actually be a valid URL. And well, in this case, it won't be returned as that unless we add it. So right in front of this, just go ahead and add HTTPS with your colons, and then you should have a valid URL. And honestly, that is all there is to making this work. Let's go to preview and see what happens. We'll of course go step by step, so we can see it as we go. But let's type in something like, hey, how are you doing today? Then if we click speak, we'll go through the steps. So there's the user input, hey, how are you doing today? We run next. Then you can see this URL gets populated. And if you were to go to this URL, you'd simply find the MP3 file available to download, but we're just taking that and putting it in our audio player. So if we run next, you can see it's now complete. And if we click our audio player, you can see that it does return exactly what we inputted. It's super cool. We say, hey, how are you doing today? It knows exactly what that is, creates that URL in MP3 format, and then we're able to play it on our app. Now, if we were to go and change this to something like, I'm great, how are you? And we press speak, we go through the steps again. And notice how it changes. So what happened in the back end was we were updating that database, meaning we were making a change to a thing. So it simply just swapped it out with I'm great, how are you? So when we press speak, it creates a new MP3 file, calls that endpoint again, and then we're able to speak the new input that the user gave us. So you probably thought coming into this that this would be a super complex thing to do, and really it's quite simple. There's really only one parameter, maybe two if you want to change the voice, that you need to change in order to make this work, and everything else works pretty much out of the box. And you can imagine that speech to text is, well, pretty much gonna be the same thing. There's only a few parameters. So I can't wait to show you how that works because it's very similar to this and very easy to do. So I'll see you in the next one.